Alone, Striking Man stands amid the aftermath of battle, placing his hands on the ground. He calls out, asking if anyone has survived. However, despite using his noise detection magic for a long time, he finds no response. It becomes clear that he is the sole survivor of the clash. This man is the High Priest, the one who once united the demons and brought humanity to the brink of collapse. In the end, he was defeated only because a warrior from the demonic realm and the mages of the White Tower risked everything to stop him. Soon after, Edna Sol Laplace, the final dragon and a neutral observer who records history, arrives and confirms the High Priest's death. She meets the White Tower's master and delivers grave news. The demonic army has invaded the tower, resulting in heavy losses, widespread destruction, and the near-total loss of valuable research. However, she also shares a small hope. The Imperial forces arrived in time to rescue a few survivors, including the Master's disciples. Though on the verge of death, the Tower Master feels relieved. When asked if he regrets his choices, he firmly denies it, standing by those he guided. However, in his final moments, he quietly admits that while he was a great mage, he failed as a leader. If given another chance, he would choose to live differently, even if it meant being seen as selfish, just to protect his people. With that, the White Tower's master, Oscar Sage, passes away. Edna records his death, honoring the sacrifices made that day. The scene then shifts to a room in the White Tower, where a blue-haired mage is tending to a black-haired man. Suddenly, the man awakens in shock, knocking over a glass of water. Confused and disoriented, he soon realizes something impossible. He is Oscar Sage, and despite clearly remembering his death, he is somehow alive again. As he tries to understand the situation, an elder named Maxim storms in, furious at the sight of him awake. Tension rises as Maxim attempts to strike him, but Oscar instinctively casts a wind shield, suspecting danger. However, the spell collapses instantly, and in that moment, Oscar realizes a shocking truth. His magic has become incredibly weak. Elder Maxim notices Oscar's wind shield, and, instead of attacking, praises his effort. He decides to postpone any punishment regarding the misuse of research funds, allowing Oscar time to recover before leaving. Once he's gone, Frank, clearly shaken, questions Oscar's behavior. However, Oscar is more concerned about his condition. His mana circuits, capacity, and purity are all severely degraded, making him doubt if this is truly his body. When Oscar asks how long he has been unconscious, Frank reveals it has only been about a day, contradicting Oscar's expectation of months. Trying to understand the situation, Oscar asks about familiar names like Lloyd, Gilly, and Sasha, but Frank is confused by his tone and references. He explains that Lloyd betrayed the White Tower and joined the Red Tower, while Gilly fled after stealing a high-level spellbook. Even more shocking, Sasha is now the Tower Master, no longer a child, but a 25-year-old adult. Overwhelmed, Oscar looks outside and realizes the world has drastically changed. Advanced magic engineering has transformed the city, confirming that 20 years have passed since his death. He then pieces together the truth. He has reincarnated into the body of Oscar Krzyzyn, a 20-year-old, low-level mage from a fallen noble family. Reviewing the body's memories, Oscar learns that Krzyzyn had taken an illegal elixir to boost his mana, which led to his collapse. While the elixir did increase raw mana, it came at a deadly cost. Upon closer inspection, Oscar discovers traces of poison hidden within the mana itself. He concludes that the previous Oscar didn't die from a mana overload, but from deliberate poisoning, something far too sophisticated to target a mere level 1 mage. Realizing this, Oscar understands that someone orchestrated this from the shadows. Now given a second chance at life, he decides to live on his own terms. And as repayment for this body, he resolves to uncover the truth and take revenge for the one who was wronged. On the outskirts of Surin, inside a mansion, a worker reports to his boss that their shop has been completely destroyed from the inside by a White Tower mage. The attacker was specifically asking about the person who sold him the elixir. While they suspect it was Oscar, the boss finds it hard to believe. After all, a mere theory mage shouldn't be capable of defeating their men so easily. The underling expresses concern that the White Tower might launch an investigation, but the boss dismisses it. According to him, the person who supplied the elixir was wearing a White Tower ring, making it appear as though the request came from one of their own. In his view, this provides enough cover to avoid suspicion. Unbeknownst to them, Oscar is already inside, silently listening. He finds the situation suspicious. No one would reveal their true identity so carelessly. By tracing the faint scent left in the elixir bottle, he has already concluded that far more people are involved in this scheme than he initially thought. Revealing himself, Oscar calmly confirms that he was the one who destroyed their shop and orders them to continue their earlier conversation. The boss lets out a heavy sigh, stating that he had considered letting Oscar go if he pretended to hear nothing. But now, he has no choice but to eliminate him. At his command, an underling draws his sword and rushes forward. This time, Oscar doesn't hold back. He casts Windbreaker, instantly killing the attacker. Even so, Oscar notes that his current power is still lacking, as the result isn't as overwhelming as he expected. Shocked by how easily his man was defeated, the shop owner immediately pulls out a firearm and shoots at Oscar. This catches Oscar's interest. He cannot detect any mana within the attack, yet it carries significant power. He begins to wonder what principle allows such force without magic. To the shop owner's disbelief, Oscar effortlessly stops the bullets midair and sends them back, knocking the man to the ground. As he approaches, Oscar calmly explains that he has already cast a sound-binding spell, ensuring that no one else in the building can hear or come to help. With the situation under control, Oscar begins his interrogation. Sitting down, he asks about the person who arranged the deal involving the elixir. The shop owner initially refuses to speak, prompting Oscar to apply pressure, using wind magic internally to create intense pain, forcing a response without unnecessary harm. Unable to endure it, the shop owner finally gives in and agrees to tell everything. He explains that their patron provided both the elixir and payment, instructing them to sell it to Oscar at a low price. When asked about the patron's appearance, he admits that the individual wore a hood, hiding their face, but was clearly wearing a White Tower ring, likely a deliberate attempt to mislead. However, one detail stands out. The patron carried a distinct scent, something fresh and mint-like. Oscar takes note of this, recognizing it as a valuable clue. Continuing the interrogation, Oscar asks how they plan to handle the aftermath of his death. The shop owner explains that the White Tower is currently preoccupied with withdrawing from the 4 major magic towers, making a proper investigation unlikely. This confuses Oscar, prompting him to demand further clarification. In response, the shop owner hands over documents detailing the situation. The records explain that the White Tower established a festival known as the Day of the White Knight, commemorating the death of the High Priest. On this day, the Emperor honors Oscar Sage's sacrifice by granting the tower significant benefits, including a 30-year tax exemption. However, despite this recognition, the White Tower has produced the worst results among the 4 major magic towers in recent years. Ever since its devastating losses 20 years ago, it has failed to recover. An important announcement from the imperial family is expected at this year's festival, and experts have already pointed out that the tower's greatest weakness is its lack of advanced magic. Hearing this, Oscar grows troubled. He clearly remembers entrusting critical documents to Edna to prevent such a decline. Determined to understand what went wrong, he decides to investigate further. The shop owner then explains the broader situation. Among the four major magic towers, the Eastern Yellow Tower, known for its mastery over lightning, has led the rise of the magic engineering era. Their innovations have revolutionized daily life, introducing technologies such as streetlights and vehicles, leaving the White Tower far behind in both influence and success. The shop owner continues explaining the state of the other magic towers. The Southern Blue Tower dominates industries like drinking water, agriculture, and potions. The Western Red Tower, known for its harsh desert origins, focuses on combat operations, assisting in missions such as monster subjugation. Meanwhile, while the other towers run massive, high-profit industries, the White Tower has been reduced to handling delivery work. Hearing this sends chills down Oscar's spine. The White Tower, once revered for its mages who soared through the skies with freedom and pride, comparable to dragons and eagles, has now fallen so far that it relies on delivery services simply because its mages can fly faster and more efficiently than others. The realization infuriates him. This decision, he learns, was enforced by the current tower master, his own former disciple. As the explanation continues, Oscar discovers that industries like water supply, agriculture, and potions were once the White Tower's greatest sources of income. However, the Blue Tower now holds a monopoly over the potion market. 20 years ago, the White Tower led that field, but all their potion-making knowledge was lost when their research was destroyed. The shop owner further explains that the water business now involves selling purified drinking water at high prices and even providing artificial rain to drought-stricken regions. Oscar struggles to understand why people would pay so much for water when wells exist, but the shop owner clarifies that this trend is largely driven by wealthy elites. In short, the White Tower can no longer compete financially with the other towers. Their rivals operate on an entirely different scale, and with only 7 months remaining until the White Night Festival, this is effectively their last chance to prove their worth. Suddenly, the shop owner begins to collapse, overwhelmed by pain from his injuries. Oscar briefly considers saving him, but after reviewing the man's records and uncovering his numerous crimes, he decides otherwise and walks away. By dawn, Oscar returns to his room, exhausted from using only a few basic spells. Sitting down to rest, he attempts to use Wind Archive, the powerful magic that once made him the greatest mage in history. However, in his current condition, he cannot sustain it at all. Realizing his limitations, Oscar decides to first understand his body completely. He begins with a detailed magical scan while reviewing information about the previous owner of this body, Oscar Krzyzyn, the heir of Count Krzyzyn and the sole survivor of a devastating mansion fire. From a young age, he was recognized as a prodigy in the magic world. His talent was so extraordinary that multiple factions competed to recruit him. During his 6 years at the Empire Academy's magic faculty, he consistently achieved perfect scores and even published a groundbreaking thesis that solidified his reputation as a genius. However, despite all that brilliance, he was believed to suffer from mana deficiency syndrome. Without it, he would have undoubtedly become one of the greatest mages of his generation. Now, everything starts to make sense. The previous Oscar possessed unmatched theoretical understanding of magic, but lacked the ability to use it. Finally, the scan is complete, and what Oscar discovers shocks him to his core. The previous Oscar never had mana deficiency syndrome at all. His mana circuits had been deliberately sealed. Mana deficiency syndrome, just as the name suggests, is a condition in which a person cannot properly circulate or accumulate mana. Normally, a mage can install up to 20 physical circuits in addition to their core mana circuit, and the number of these circuits determines their overall level. However, for someone with this condition, the foundational system is incomplete, making it nearly impossible to progress beyond level 3, no matter how hard they train. But Oscar Krzyzyn's case is different. His circuits were not naturally defective. They had been deliberately sealed by someone. If the previous Oscar truly was a genius, then he must have already known this. With that thought in mind, Oscar heads to the library, searching for a diary or any clue that might reveal the truth. According to Frank, Oscar Krzyzyn had a pretty bad reputation as a mage. However, Oscar begins to suspect that this may have been nothing more than a carefully crafted persona. Perhaps, knowing that someone was targeting him, he intentionally acted like a reckless mage to lower suspicion. If that's true, then it also explains why he resorted to the illegal elixir. With no one he could trust, he had no choice but to try and break the seal on his own. Unlike him, however, Oscar believes he can succeed. He only needs to untangle the knot binding the circuits. While gathering books for research, Oscar comes across a text titled A Reinterpretation of Basic Magic, filled with detailed notes. As he flips through the pages, he notices sections that have been carefully marked and studied. The deeper he reads, the more he realizes something astonishing. Every theory and concept written inside is accurate. Even without being able to use magic, the previous Oscar had simulated countless experiments purely in his mind and arrived at correct conclusions. At that moment, Oscar fully understands why he was called a genius. In terms of theoretical understanding, the two of them are remarkably similar. More importantly, it becomes clear that the previous Oscar never gave up on magic. On the contrary, he worked harder than anyone else. His notes reflect an overwhelming passion, a love for magic that never faded. Then, Oscar finds a message written in the book. It states that the previous Oscar was about to attempt his greatest challenge. This confirms it. He knew everything. And yet, he had to face it all alone. A young mage, burdened by a cruel fate, who never broke and quietly walked a lonely path. Understanding this, Oscar makes a firm vow. As the 17th master of the Magic Tower, he swears to undo the knot that the previous Oscar could not. Sitting down, he prepares himself for the task and makes another promise as well. Those who destroyed the previous Oscar's life will be held accountable. Exhausted from analyzing the sealed circuits, Oscar eventually falls asleep. But the moment he does, he finds himself standing in a garden. There, he sees his past self, teaching his young disciples. Instantly, he realizes what's happening. This is the effect of the curse placed on him by a nightmare viscount from the demon realm. Because of that curse, every time he sleeps, he is forced to relive fragments of his past. He had hoped that the curse would disappear after taking over a new body, but it seems to be bound to his soul, not his physical form. Still, there is a small sense of relief. This memory is not painful. It shows his disciples before they were changed by time and hardship. In the memory, Oscar is explaining the magic system. He teaches that both mages and knights use power that can be broadly divided into 4 categories: enhancement, acceleration, balance, and special types. While magic may appear similar on the surface, its core nature differs based on these classifications. The White Tower, he explains, specializes in balance-type magic. Among the children listening are Lloyd Schultz, only 9 years old at the time, Sasha Maist, just 5, and Gilead Dominic, who is 7. Oscar continues, explaining how each tower focuses on different strengths. The Golden Tower prioritizes speed, specializing in acceleration-type magic. The Red Tower focuses on raw power, representing enhancement-type magic. Meanwhile, both the Azure and White Towers emphasize balance. At one point, young Gilead confidently declares that he wants to choose acceleration-type magic. However, Oscar gently corrects him. Magic type isn't something you choose, it's something you're born with. To demonstrate, Oscar draws a magic circle and asks Sasha to try it first. She follows his instructions, and the result reveals that she possesses balance-type magic, the same as Oscar. Delighted by this, Sasha beams with excitement. Next, Gilead steps forward and performs the test himself, discovering that he indeed has acceleration-type magic, just as he had hoped. Lloyd is revealed to possess special-type magic. Disappointed, he asks Oscar if it's possible to change one's magic type after it has been determined. Oscar explains that special types are extremely rare, making up only about 0.2% of all mages. Curious, he asks Lloyd why he wants to change it. Although it isn't possible, Lloyd honestly admits that he simply wanted to have the same magic type as his master. Hearing this, Oscar playfully responds that, since Lloyd is so rare, he will receive the most private lessons out of everyone. He even pretends to worry about finding a way to change magic types. This immediately cheers Lloyd up, and he eagerly asks Oscar to promise him those extra lessons. The two seal it with a pinky promise. Watching this memory unfold fills Oscar with warmth. It reminds him why Lloyd was once called the Promise Man. No matter how mature he tried to act, he was still just a child. Oscar suddenly wakes up to a loud announcement, instructing him to report to Lab 4202. By this point, Oscar has unlocked 12 out of 20 physical circuits. In the process, he has also gained 2 additional mana circuit lines, advancing himself to level 2. Arriving at the lab, he finds Elder Maxim waiting at his desk. Maxim asks about Oscar's condition and briefly mentions his memories. Before Oscar's reincarnation, Maxim had actually been his junior. Now 45 years old, he was once a diligent and sincere mage whom Oscar believed would have a bright future. Oscar can't help but smile, recalling how Maxim used to follow him around, calling him senior, and later Magic Tower Master, something Oscar always found endearing. Seeing Oscar suddenly laugh, Maxim is left confused. Getting straight to the point, he brings up a report regarding the deaths of the Gordon family's head and acting leader. He then asks Oscar if he has anything to explain. Oscar calmly states that they were killed after attempting to assassinate him. This shocks Maxim, prompting Oscar to present the evidence, commission fees, a ledger, and the elixir connected to the incident. He explains that he initially went to confront them, but the situation escalated when they tried to kill him. After reviewing the ledger and confirming the recovered money, Maxim determines that Oscar's account is credible. Based on the evidence, he officially closes the case as self-defense. With that settled, Oscar requests a personal favor. He wants to meet the current Magic Tower Master. Maxim explains that this wouldn't normally be difficult, as he often discusses magic with Sasha. However, she is currently away on an important commission and won't return for another 6 months. The fact that the Tower Master is handling such minor tasks highlights the absence of higher-level mages. Oscar also learns that Sasha is currently only level 7. At her age, he had already reached level 9, and given her talent, she should have at least reached level 8 by now. Changing the topic, Maxim asks if Oscar has been practicing attack magic again. Oscar casually replies that he trains whenever he feels like it. Satisfied, Maxim dismisses him. After Oscar leaves, the Vice Master of the White Magic Tower, Hemel Glimwitz, arrives. He advises Maxim not to be too harsh on Oscar. However, Maxim isn't easily convinced. He knows that even basic wind shield magic couldn't be refined to that level in just a day or two. This leads him to believe that Oscar has been secretly training for quite some time. The two then head off to attend an elders meeting. Meanwhile, Oscar makes his way to the 10th floor, the very garden he saw in his dream. Compared to his memories, the place now feels empty and quiet. As he walks through it, a gardener notices him and respectfully greets him as young Master Oscar. Curious, Oscar asks who he is. The man introduces himself as Walter, the caretaker of the Magic Tower's facilities. Realizing the rumors are true, Walter notes that Oscar seems to have lost his memories. He gently mentions that they used to spend time chatting together in this very garden. Oscar asks why Walter addresses him as young master. In response, Walter explains that he has been working at the White Tower since the time of the previous master, the great Oscar Sage. Hearing this, Oscar feels a quiet sense of satisfaction and decides to embrace the title. He then asks Walter to continue being his conversation partner. Although touched by the offer, Walter declines. He reveals that he will soon be leaving the tower after 40 years of service. Concerned, Oscar asks if something is wrong. Walter explains that during his time at the tower, he has served under 3 different masters, while his co-workers have gradually left over the years. Now, he is the only one remaining in his department. The reason he endured for so long was because of something the former master, Oscar Sage, once said during his appointment ceremony, that everyone in the tower should live with pride as members of the White Tower. Those words stayed with him all his life. However, it is precisely because of that pride that Walter has decided to leave. Confused, Oscar questions why such a meaningful belief would lead to his resignation. Walter calmly explains that the tower is no longer in a stable condition. Even the budget for maintaining basic facilities has been significantly reduced. Next month will mark Walter's 40th year at the tower. At that moment, Oscar realizes the real issue, the long service award. All non-mage staff members of the White Tower are entitled to a medal and a monetary reward upon completing 20 and 40 years of service. For 40 years, the reward amounts to 200,000 bells, enough to buy a house in most major cities. But Walter is worried that the current White Tower cannot afford such a payment. To honor that obligation, the tower would have to take on dangerous commissions and risk even more lives just to gather the necessary funds. Unable to accept that burden, Walter chooses to step away. To him, the White Tower is more than a workplace. It is his second home, and he cannot bring himself to strain it further. Hearing this, Oscar is shaken. He hadn't realized just how dire the tower's situation had become. He had always believed that other towers, like the Azure Tower, were simply pursuing wealth excessively. But now he understands. Those towers thrive because they have already secured overwhelming financial success. In contrast, all Oscar has are titles like War Hero and Savior of Humanity. Yet those titles mean nothing now if the tower cannot even support the people who have dedicated their entire lives to it. Lost in thought, Oscar clenches his fists tightly until Walter notices and gently calls out to him. As Walter carefully bandages his hands, Oscar learns that he plans to leave in just 2 weeks. At that moment, Oscar makes a firm decision. He tells Walter to stay, that he should continue being his conversation partner and remain at the White Tower. With determination in his voice, Oscar promises that he will restore the tower's prosperity and ensure that something like this never happens again. Back in his room, Oscar reflects on the bold promise he just made. The problem is, he has no clear plan yet. The only options that come to mind are research, lectures, and commissions, but those either take too long to generate income or require a higher level of power than he currently possesses. At level 2, he simply doesn't have the luxury of time. What he needs is a business that can generate massive profit quickly. As he thinks it through, one idea stands out: potions. While going through a newspaper, he comes across a piece of information that immediately catches his attention. The scene then shifts to the Vice Tower Master's office. where the elders are gathered to discuss Oscar's embezzlement. Fidenlina, the elder in charge of finances, is furious and demands strict punishment. However, Elder Maxim argues that the situation is already under control, as Oscar has shown signs of remorse. This only angers her further. As the argument escalates, Fidenlina suggests placing Oscar into isolation training as punishment. The Vice Tower Master, observing the heated exchange, can't help but question how two elders nearing their 50s could argue like this. He steps in and firmly rejects the idea, stating that such training would be excessive. Instead, he proposes that Oscar repay 3 times the amount of the misused research funds. Even so, Fidenlina remains unsatisfied. The discussion then shifts to a far more pressing issue, the tower's financial crisis. With funds running dangerously low, a decision must be made soon. Fidenlina suggests selling the equipment from the potion production chamber, which would allow them to survive for another 3 months. Otherwise, the White Tower may be forced to shut down entirely. The Vice Tower Master immediately opposes this idea. He reminds them that the White Tower is a place for mages to study and share knowledge. Selling off their core infrastructure would be equivalent to sacrificing their future just to survive the present. Fidenlina coldly questions whether the White Tower even has a future left. They have waited 20 years for a miracle, and none has come. Even if a genius exists somewhere, she believes no one will come to save them. Just as the Vice Tower Master is about to respond, there's a knock on the door. Oscar enters and greets the elders before getting straight to the point. He proposes starting a business. This immediately irritates Fidenlina. From her perspective, Oscar has already misused funds, and now he's suggesting another risky venture that could waste even more resources. Ignoring her reaction, Oscar turns to the Vice Tower Master and brings up an article he read. The Vince estate has recently gone into lockdown due to a severe flu outbreak. The Vice Tower Master confirms the news and adds that there are rumors it could be the Cadena flu, a highly dangerous illness with no known cure. In the past, the White Tower had developed a vaccine for it, so it was never a major threat. However, that formula was lost 20 years ago during the tower's downfall. Even the Azure Tower, which now dominates the potion industry, has failed to recreate it despite years of effort. And that's exactly where Oscar sees an opportunity. He declares his plan to produce and sell a vaccine for the Cadena flu. It's something the White Tower once monopolized, and now he intends to reclaim that position. However, Fidenlina dismisses the idea immediately. In her eyes, the plan isn't even worth considering. For the past 20 years, countless magic towers and pharmaceutical groups have invested immense time and resources into recreating the vaccine, and all of them have failed. Fidenlina firmly believes there is no way a 20-year-old like Oscar could succeed where countless experts have failed. In response, Oscar confidently states that while everyone else may have failed, he is a genius, and he won't. His bold claim only angers her further. She continues criticizing him, pointing out the losses he has already caused the White Tower. Before things escalate, the Vice Tower Master steps in and tells her to remain professional. Regardless of her role in managing finances, Oscar has presented a formal investment proposal as a mage of the White Tower, and it deserves to be treated seriously. Realizing her tone crossed a line, Fidenlina composes herself and offers an apology. Oscar, in turn, acknowledges why she dislikes him so much. Over the past 2 years, he hasn't achieved anything meaningful. Even so, he reassures the Vice Tower Master that he is confident in his plan and urges him to consider it carefully. The Vice Tower Master then asks the key question: what makes Oscar so certain that the outbreak is indeed Cadena flu? This is exactly what Oscar was waiting for. He directs them to the second page of the newspaper, pointing out an unusual development involving Archbishop Baldwin of the El Terra Order. Until now, the Archbishop had consistently stayed in major cities for about a month during his pilgrimage. However, his recent change in plans raises suspicion. The El Terra Order, which worships the Mother of Earth, Terra, has only 7 archbishops. As leaders of the order, they are expected to be dignified and incorruptible. In reality, however, their position often involves political maneuvering, especially for those aiming to become cardinals, a rank that requires significant financial backing. Oscar begins connecting the dots. During their pilgrimage, archbishops are allowed to stay in each estate for up to a month, primarily to meet nobles and merchants and secure funding. However, Surin, once a prosperous city, is now in decline. While the elders initially assumed the extended stay is for prayers and blessings, Oscar points out that this makes the situation even more suspicious. There is little reason to spend so much time praying over a deteriorating region. He then outlines the pilgrimage route: Surin, followed by Mosque, Melbourne, Greenwale, and finally Vince. The pattern is clear. Archbishop Baldwin stayed in Knox for a month before arriving in Surin, and he is expected to spend a full month in each of the following cities as well. This effectively delays his visit to Vince as much as possible. At that moment, the elders understand Oscar's reasoning. If a major incident, like an epidemic, were to occur during the archbishop's visit, it could be interpreted as divine punishment from the Mother of Earth. Such a scandal could destroy his chances of becoming a cardinal. By delaying his arrival, he avoids that risk. Even Fidenlina can't help but acknowledge the sharpness of Oscar's analysis. The Vice Tower Master is convinced as well, but there's still a problem. Officially supporting Oscar's plan would strain the already fragile finances of the White Tower, leaving them unable to support other mages. Instead, he makes a personal decision. He offers his own savings, 30,000 bells, as funding for Oscar's project. Although grateful, Oscar is inwardly concerned. The amount is far from sufficient. Still, he accepts it and heads straight to the potion production chamber, deciding to move forward with a backup plan. If he can create even a single vaccine sample, he can use it to secure funding directly from the Archbishop. For now, Frank assists him with the preparations. Putting on his glasses, Oscar begins his work. Oscar begins working on the potion, but before attempting anything complex, he creates a simple energy drink as practice. He had been worried about his skills in this new body, but the result proves that his concerns were unnecessary. Meanwhile, Frank gathers all the medicinal herbs Oscar requests. Exhausted from the task, he asks for something to drink and hands over the receipt. Without hesitation, Oscar gives him a fatigue recovery potion, even though it's quite expensive, and takes the receipt. After drinking it, Frank immediately feels refreshed. Oscar inspects the ingredients and finds that their quality is exceptional. Frank proudly explains that he personally selected the best ones, even frustrating the seller in the process. Impressed, Oscar jokingly suggests that Frank might be better suited to becoming a merchant than a mage. Frank laughs and admits he's considered it, especially if the White Tower goes bankrupt. Before he can finish that thought, Oscar cuts him off, clearly unwilling to hear it. When Frank asks what to do next, mentioning that Elder Fidenlina assigned him to assist, Oscar gives him instructions to help organize the materials. Although Oscar doesn't truly need an assistant, he recalls reading about talented but troublesome individuals within the tower, people with great potential who lack direction. If guided properly, they could become valuable assets. Frank Sirius is one of them. As they arrange the ingredients, Frank notices something concerning. Many of the herbs are poisonous. Black lilies of the valley, red camellias, ghost mushrooms, and Merva leaves are all known toxins. Oscar calmly explains that being poisonous doesn't make them unusable. In fact, with the right method, they can become powerful medicine. Frank mentions the standard detoxification process, boiling the herbs in water for around 12 hours. Oscar confirms this, but points out a major flaw. The process also removes most of the nutrients. To solve this, he introduces a better method, using a steamer. By steaming the herbs instead of boiling them, they can retain up to 98% of their nutrients. They begin the process, placing the ingredients into the steamer until they soften, making detoxification easier. Then, Oscar casts an air drain spell, gathering the steam into a concentrated sphere. From there, the toxins are carefully separated. Oscar instructs Frank to observe closely. By precisely combining 23% red camellias and 47% myrtle leaves, along with the other refined components, he successfully creates a remedy for the Cadena flu. Frank is stunned by how straightforward the process appears. Curious, Oscar asks him to try it himself. However, it's not as easy as it looks. Frank struggles. He cannot yet use multiple spells simultaneously, a skill typically mastered at level 4 or 5. As a level 3 mage, he hesitates to admit this. Seeing this, Oscar decides to teach him a technique. He explains that dual casting isn't some hidden secret. It's simply about dividing one's focus. By imagining the mind as split into separate sections, a mage can handle different spells at the same time, one on the left, one on the right. Following these instructions, Frank tries again and succeeds. He's shocked by how simple it feels and wonders why such knowledge was never shared. Oscar explains the truth. Many mages hoard techniques out of pride and greed, refusing to teach what they struggled to learn. Over time, this became an unspoken tradition. But on real battlefields, such thinking only leads to failure. Survival depends on sharing knowledge and learning together. For the White Tower to recover, it must embrace collaboration and open teaching. Inspired, Frank quickly adapts, and astonishingly, he manages to create the vaccine on his very first attempt. Excited, he immediately begins gathering more ingredients to produce additional doses. To speed things up, Oscar decides to use a larger steamer, allowing them to process everything at once. After several hours of work, they successfully produce a total of 514 bottles of the vaccine. Just then, Elder Maxim rushes in with urgent news. He informs Oscar that the Azure Towers pharmaceutical company, Newtek, is scheduled to meet Archbishop Baldwin in just 1 hour. If they secure the contract first, Oscar's vaccine could become irrelevant. The situation looks dire, and both Frank and Maxim are visibly discouraged. But Oscar remains calm. He points out that the Cadena flu is classified as a B-rank disaster, which means there's still an opportunity. With that in mind, he quickly sets a new plan into motion and gives Elder Maxim specific instructions. The scene then shifts to a lodging in Surin, where representatives from Newtek arrive for their meeting with Archbishop Baldwin. Among them are Moira Main, a level 5 mage from the Azure Tower, and Neil Bryan, the managing director of Newtek. After exchanging greetings, they sit down and get straight to business. The Archbishop asks about their progress on a Cadena flu solution. Moira confidently explains that development is underway, but they still need to complete clinical trials. After that, they must obtain approval from the Empire's Food and Drug Administration. In total, the process will take nearly 6 months. Hearing this, Archbishop Baldwin grows visibly frustrated. He is scheduled to depart for Vince in just 4 months, time he clearly doesn't have. At that moment, a knock interrupts the meeting. A servant informs him that another mage has arrived requesting an audience. Confused, Baldwin asks Moira why she didn't mention anyone else accompanying them. She immediately denies it, stating that no one else came with them. Suspicious, Baldwin allows the visitor to enter. The door opens, and standing there is none other than Oscar, the White Tower mage. Calmly stepping inside, He greets the Archbishop and introduces himself, stating that he has come with an offer worth considering. Archbishop Baldwin furrows his brow and asks why a mage from the White Tower has come all the way here. Calmly, Oscar reveals his purpose. He has come to negotiate the sale of the Cadena flu cure. Baldwin notes the timing is perfect, pointing out that the Azure Tower's representatives are also present for the same purpose. Oscar, however, remains unfazed. He explains that the Azure Tower isn't fully prepared yet, but the White Tower is ready to negotiate immediately. Moira, the Azure Tower mage, erupts in anger, insisting that Oscar is lying. After all, the White Tower supposedly lacks the money and technology to develop a cure. Baldwin, sensing her point, asks Oscar for proof. Without hesitation, Oscar presents a sample of the cure. The Archbishop's expression brightens, impressed by the quality. He immediately inquires about production capacity and deadlines if the negotiations move forward. Moira seethes, watching another tower's mage gain the Archbishop's attention. Baldwin, however, humbles her with a simple gesture, keeping the discussion professional. Moira tries to regain control, pointing out that the White Tower doesn't have permission from the Empire's Food and Drug Administration, and asks Oscar if he does. When Oscar admits he doesn't, Moira smirks, thinking she now has an edge. She boasts about the Azure Tower's long history, assuring Baldwin that their treatment will be the best in history. Oscar, however, can't stay silent. Amused, he interjects, reminding everyone that the White Tower was established 5 years before the Azure Tower. 5 years that no Azure Tower master has been able to close, even in 10,000 years. He emphasizes the White Tower's historical monopoly over the magic medicine market. Moira scoffs, calling it ancient history, which only fuels Oscar's anger. He exudes an overwhelming aura, enough to terrify her, clearly beyond what a level 2 mage should be capable of. The argument is interrupted when the Archbishop's servant rushes in with a call from the Lord of Vince. The Lord expresses gratitude, explaining that the White Tower's elders secretly provided the cure, and now all the Cadena flu patients have been cured in just a few hours. Baldwin asks about potential side effects, but there are none. The Lord of Vince requests the next batch, and Baldwin realizes Oscar's strategy. The White Tower has effectively positioned itself as the indispensable provider. Moira protests, claiming this violates imperial medical regulations. Oscar calmly corrects her, explaining that war laws apply in this situation. The Archbishop and Moira look puzzled. Oscar continues, 20 years ago, during the Demon War, a pandemic weapon caused countless deaths. Even with mages producing treatments, the approval process by the imperial authorities took too long, and thousands died before they could receive a cure. Now, the White Tower is prepared to act immediately, using the laws of war to bypass bureaucratic delays, a bold move that underscores Oscar's ingenuity and the Tower's resurgence. That's why His Majesty added a clause to Article 42, Clause 8, stating that treatments intended for the wounded in times of war would be categorized as special treatments and would not be subject to the Empire's medical authority regulations. Moira immediately objects, claiming they are not at war. Calmly, Oscar explains that there are 3 cases where a situation is considered a war. First, an ongoing conflict against another species or nation. Second, a revolution. And third, a disaster classified as B rank or higher. Since the Cadena flu is a B-class natural disaster, there is no need to follow the medical authorities' laws. Moira is left speechless, but Neil steps in, claiming they can do the same, and quickly sends their treatment to Archbishop Baldwin. However, the race is already over. The moment the White Tower's cure reached Vince, victory was secured. Moreover, the Lord of Vince believes Archbishop Baldwin is working with the White Tower, so he cannot backtrack and claim it was the Azure Tower instead. Neil suggests lowering the price, but this only angers Baldwin further, who sees it as an attempt to buy his favor. He orders them to leave immediately. Moira rises, clenching his fists, threatening Oscar as he departs. Before he can leave, Oscar calmly informs him that he has already registered the patent for the treatment and vaccine with the palace. If the Azure Tower wants to sell their version, they must pay royalties to the White Tower, or risk being shut out. Enraged, Moira storms out. Neil greets Baldwin and then Oscar, and as he passes by, a familiar scent catches Oscar's attention. A refreshing, clear mint smell, the same scent the underworld boss had mentioned. Recognizing it, Oscar chooses to remain silent for the moment. Baldwin invites Oscar to sit so they can discuss further details. The conversation turns to pricing. Baldwin reveals that the Azure Tower in Newtek had requested 2 million bells for their cure. Oscar smiles confidently and announces he will sell it for 5 million bells, surprising the Archbishop. A few hours later at the White Tower, Oscar hands a check for 10 million bells to Fidenlina, leaving her speechless. After a moment, she smiles and compliments him, saying she knew he could do it. The Vice Master also examines the check, bewildered at the amount, knowing Baldwin would never authorize such a sum. Oscar calmly explains that the extra money comes from advertising fees he added to the deal, showcasing his cunning and strategic foresight. According to the official statement from the White Magic Tower, Archbishop Baldwin had seemingly predicted the Cadena flu outbreak, as if he had received a revelation from the Earth Mother. For someone aiming for the next cardinal seat, the title of an archbishop, blessed with revelation, was an irresistible temptation. Impressed by Oscar's offer, Baldwin signed the contract for 10 million bells, far exceeding the initial suggestion. In return, the White Tower promised not only to deliver the vaccines, but also a second batch of the cure within a week. The Vice Master couldn't help but praise Oscar's ingenuity. The original punishment had been for Oscar to repay 3 times the embezzled research funds, but instead, he returned 400 times that amount. The Vice Master withdrew the punishment entirely, and even Fidenlina had no objections. Fully impressed, the Vice Master promised to support Oscar in every possible way. All he needed to do was ask. Oscar immediately requested to gather as many mages as possible at level 4 or higher. The Vice Master agreed, allowing Oscar to select them personally. He instructed Fidenlina to post a recruitment notice in the tower, stating that level 4 or higher mages were needed for the potion lab, with a daily wage and meat as a side dish. Within hours, the potion lab was filled with senior students. Oscar arrived and was amazed at the number of students who had come voluntarily. Trying to capture their attention, Oscar cast a soundbind spell to silence the chatter. He bowed and respectfully requested their help to produce the Cadena flu vaccine and cure. The senior students smirked at his display, suspicious that Oscar might be attempting another scam. Confused by their reaction, Oscar asked Frank if the students really hated him that much. Frank confirmed that their resentment was understandable. They remembered Oscar's arrogance, reckless spending, lack of research. This made Oscar question whether the previous Oscar had truly been such a terrible mage. One of the senior students, a yellow-haired girl, stepped forward to ask questions about recreating the lost potion formulas. Oscar revealed that the formulas would be revived, surprising everyone. She then asked if the cure had been proven effective. Oscar confirmed that a contract had already been signed with the order. The girl hesitated and asked why Oscar would share such a valuable secret with them, considering the risk of leaks to other towers. Oscar candidly admitted that he didn't understand why senior students continued to stay at the White Tower despite their talents. Angered by his attitude, she declared that she and the others had wasted their time and began to leave. Oscar called out to her, claiming he knew the sacrifices she had made for the White Tower. The girl froze and turned around. Her name was Rena, a 25-year-old mage whose talent and leadership had drawn attention from the Red Tower and various corporations, all of whom she had refused. Oscar also knew about Herrick Dryan, a 26-year-old level 5 mage whom the Imperial Palace had offered a position as a royal battle mage, but he declined. Similarly, Deckard Line, another 26-year-old level 5 mage, had rejected multiple offers to become an instructor at the Imperial Academy. Rena and her peers were the backbone of the White Tower, and Oscar now understood the level of dedication and talent he had at his disposal. Level 4 mage Sepia Rose, 23 years old, had also been sought out by the Yellow Tower for her creative alchemy skills, but she turned them down. Not only the students Oscar named, but all the senior mages in the White Tower had received similar offers, and none of them accepted. Oscar reflected on himself, admitting that if he had received such offers, he wasn't sure he could have turned them down. Rena and the other students realized that the elders already knew about all the offers but had chosen to pretend otherwise, so as not to burden them. Oscar reminded them that the White Tower was enduring its coldest winter in history. Even though they could have left for somewhere warmer, they chose to stay, and that's why he trusted them completely. Then, with a show of exaggerated sadness, Oscar pretended that if the seniors wouldn't help, he would have no choice but to make the potion only with Frank. To make it more convincing, he began brewing the potion himself while instructing Frank to follow along, acting as though no one else would come to assist. Wearing his glasses and looking forlorn, he captured the attention of the senior students. Rena coughed, adjusted her glasses, and started helping, which encouraged others to join in. Frank was amazed, realizing just how persuasive Oscar could be with his words. A week later, Oscar went to the 10th floor to read the newspaper while waiting for the Vice Master to bring back Walter. The news had spread exactly as planned by Oscar and Archbishop Baldwin. Frank came running, informing Oscar that pre-orders for the vaccine were flooding in from all over the country. The sales could make them a fortune, though the hype would fade once the outbreak ended. No worries, though. Oscar had healing potions ready, which were always in demand. Frank excitedly asked if they were the legendary Tear of the Stars potion, but Oscar explained they would only sell low and mid-grade potions for now. Tear of the Stars was the tower's most famous potion, said to even have the power to revive the dead. Releasing it now would risk the Azure Tower trying to steal the formula, but for now, the Archbishop was acting as their shield. Oscar focused on strengthening the White Tower first. He instructed Frank to gather ingredients for the Tear of the Stars, naming 2 herbs. But Frank stopped him, noting that even these 2 were difficult to find now. Oscar was shocked. During his time, these herbs were a specialty of Serin, but they had disappeared over the ages. Determined to see for himself, he dragged Frank along. The carriage could not take them deeper into the region, so they walked 10 miles. Eventually, they spotted a cabin. Knocking on the door, they were greeted by an old man, who asked if they had walked all the way there. Frank confirmed, explaining that the carriage could only take them to the start of the trail. Just then, a few cars arrived, with people asking the old man to sell his land immediately.